This full 4K documentary explores the entirety of Africa's history, tracing its journey from the dawn of humanity and ancient civilizations through the rise of powerful kingdoms, the impact of colonization, and the ongoing quest for independence and identity in the modern era. If you enjoyed it, like, comment your thoughts on Africa's rich history, and subscribe for more full-length 4K documentaries. The story of Africa begins deep in the midst of prehistory, for it is the continent where human life first emerged, a cradle of humanity whose significance echoes through the corridors of time. Millions of years ago, the earliest hominins walked the vast savannas and woodlands, laying the biological and cultural foundations for all human societies to come. This ancient heritage is not merely a scientific footnote but a profound testament to Africa's central role in the human saga. As the first hunter-gatherer communities evolved, they adapted to diverse environments, mastering the art of survival through intricate knowledge of the land, flora, and fauna. These early societies, though simple in their material culture, created the blueprints for social structures and cultural expressions that would endure for millennia. From these humble beginnings, the continent witnessed a remarkable transformation with the advent of agriculture. Around 10,000 years ago, communities began to cultivate crops and domesticate animals, initiating a profound shift from nomadic life to settled existence. This agricultural revolution allowed populations to grow, societies to complexify, and permanent settlements to take root. The fertile banks of the Nile River became a focal point for such developments, providing rich soil and reliable water sources that supported burgeoning civilizations. It was here that some of the world's earliest complex societies emerged, marked by sophisticated political systems, monumental architecture, and vibrant cultural practices. Ancient Egypt stands as the most renowned among these early civilizations, its legacy etched into the fabric of human history through the grandeur of its pyramids, temples, and written language. For over 3 millennia, the Egyptians harnessed the Nile's rhythms, constructing a society that combined religious fervor, technological innovation, and centralized governance. Hieroglyphics captured myths, laws, and knowledge, while their advances in mathematics, medicine, and engineering laid foundations that influenced neighboring cultures and future generations. Yet, Egypt was not alone. To the south, the kingdom of Nubia flourished, intertwining with Egyptian culture yet maintaining distinct political and cultural identities. Nubia's wealth derived from its control of trade routes and natural resources, and its rulers often rivaled their northern neighbors in power and prestige. Further west along the Mediterranean coast, the city-state of Carthage rose from Phoenician settlers into a formidable maritime empire. Known for its seafaring prowess and mercantile acumen, Carthage established a network of colonies and trading posts stretching across the western Mediterranean. Its rivalry with Rome culminated in the Punic Wars, events that would reshape the geopolitical landscape of the ancient world. Carthage's legacy is emblematic of Africa's dynamic interactions with other civilizations, highlighting a continent that was never isolated but engaged in vibrant exchanges of goods, ideas, and culture. Meanwhile, deep within the African interior, the Kingdom of Kush emerged as a powerful entity centered around the region of modern-day Sudan. Rising from the decline of Egypt's new kingdom, Kushite rulers adopted and adapted Egyptian customs, creating a distinctive civilization marked by impressive pyramids at Meroe and a flourishing iron industry. Kush's strategic location enabled it to control important trade routes connecting sub-Saharan Africa with the Mediterranean world, facilitating the flow of gold, ivory, and other precious commodities. These exchanges were not merely economic but also conduits for cultural diffusion, spreading religious beliefs, artistic styles, and technological innovations. Across the continent, these early African kingdoms and societies were interconnected by extensive trade networks that transcended geographical and cultural boundaries. The Sahara Desert, often perceived as a formidable barrier, in fact served as a vital conduit for commerce and communication. Caravans traversed the vast arid expanse, linking communities from the Mediterranean shores to the Sahelian grasslands and beyond. Salt, a precious commodity essential for human survival and food preservation, journeyed southward in exchange for gold, cola nuts, and other goods. These trade routes fostered not only economic prosperity but also the dissemination of ideas, religious practices, and artistic motifs, weaving a complex web of intercultural relations that enriched African societies. The establishment of early urban centers along the Nile and within the Sahara further illustrates the continent's complexity during this formative era. Cities such as Kama in Nubia and later Napata and Meroe functioned as political capitals and cultural hubs, boasting impressive architecture, including temples, palaces, and defensive structures. These urban centers were not isolated enclaves but vibrant loci of administration, religious activity, and commerce. Their existence challenges simplistic narratives that have historically portrayed Africa as devoid of sophisticated social organization prior to European contact. Moreover, the development of writing systems in Africa, most notably the Egyptian hieroglyphs and the Meroitic script of Kush, underscores the continent's intellectual achievements. These scripts enabled the recording of history, religious texts, and administrative records, preserving the voices of ancient peoples for posterity. Literacy, often concentrated within priestly or royal classes, was instrumental in maintaining social order and transmitting cultural values across generations. The cultural richness of these early civilizations extended beyond material accomplishments to encompass profound spiritual and philosophical traditions. African peoples cultivated elaborate belief systems that explained natural phenomena, human origins, and the cosmos. Ancestor veneration, animism, and polytheism formed the bedrock of religious life, with rituals and ceremonies reinforcing community cohesion and social hierarchies. Artistic expressions in sculpture, pottery, and textiles reflected both aesthetic sensibilities and symbolic meanings, often intertwined with religious and political authority. It is important to recognize that while the Nile Valley civilizations receive considerable attention, Africa's early history is equally defined by the diversity of its peoples and environments. In the forested regions of West and Central Africa, various groups developed distinct modes of subsistence and social organization, adapting to their ecological contexts. These societies laid the groundwork for later complex states and empires that would arise during the medieval period. Thus, the ancient African civilizations and early societies represent foundational chapters in the continent's vast historical narrative. Their achievements in statecraft, trade, culture, and technology reveal a continent teeming with innovation and interconnectedness long before external powers made their presence felt. The echoes of these early epochs resonate through Africa's enduring heritage, shaping identities and aspirations that continue to inspire. As we reflect on this distant past, we gain a fuller appreciation of Africa's integral role in the human story, a role marked not by isolation or stagnation but by dynamism, resilience, and creativity. As the centuries unfolded, the African continent witnessed the emergence of powerful medieval kingdoms that would come to define an era of remarkable wealth, culture, and influence, particularly across West Africa. The rise of these empires signaled a profound transformation in political organization and economic vitality, propelled in large measure by the intricate trans-Saharan trade networks that connected disparate regions and peoples. These routes, stretching across vast deserts and savannas, became arteries of commerce and culture, facilitating exchanges that resonated far beyond the continent's borders. The Kingdom of Ghana, flourishing between the 6th and 13th centuries, stands as one of the earliest and most illustrious empires in this period. Situated in the region that now encompasses southeastern Mauritania and western Mali, Ghana leveraged its strategic position between the gold-rich forests of the south and the salt mines of the Sahara to become a pivotal hub of trans-Saharan trade. The kingdom's rulers controlled and taxed the flow of these precious commodities, accumulating immense wealth that enabled the construction of formidable cities and the patronage of vibrant cultural life. Ghana's capital became a bustling center of commerce and governance, where merchants from across Africa and beyond gathered to exchange goods and ideas. Following Ghana's decline, the Mali Empire rose to prominence in the 13th century, reaching its zenith under the leadership of Mansour Musa, whose legendary pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 brought unprecedented attention to West Africa's riches. Mali's wealth was deeply rooted in control over the gold trade, but it also benefited from thriving agriculture, livestock, and crafts. The empire's political structure was sophisticated, with a centralized authority complemented by local governance that allowed for relative stability and prosperity. Mali's influence extended across vast territories, encompassing diverse peoples and cultures, united under a shared imperial framework. Central to Mali's cultural and intellectual legacy was the city of Timbuktu, which evolved into a renowned center of learning and scholarship. Its libraries and madrasas attracted scholars, poets, and theologians from across the Islamic world, fostering a golden age of knowledge that included advancements in astronomy, mathematics, law, and literature. Timbuktu's manuscripts, painstakingly preserved through centuries, bear witness to the continent's rich intellectual traditions and its role as a beacon of African and Islamic civilization. The succeeding Songhai Empire, which rose to dominance in the 15th and 16th centuries, further expanded the reach of West African power. Under rulers such as Sunni Ali and Askia Muhammad, Songhai consolidated vast territories and reasserted control over trade routes that had become the lifeblood of the region's economy. This empire maintained a complex bureaucracy and military organization, enabling it to sustain control over its diverse populations and fend off external threats. The continuation of cultural and educational institutions, especially in cities like Gao and Timbuktu, underscored the enduring legacy of West Africa's medieval empires. These great kingdoms were not isolated entities but part of a broader network of interaction that included North African and Mediterranean societies. The trans-Saharan trade routes facilitated the movement of goods such as gold, salt, ivory, kola nuts, and textiles, but they also served as channels for the transmission of religion, language, and technology. Islam, introduced through these commercial contacts, became a significant force in West African societies, influencing legal systems, educational institutions, and artistic expression. While Islamic faith and scholarship flourished, it often coexisted with indigenous beliefs, producing a rich tapestry of cultural synthesis. The physical challenges of the Sahara Desert, a vast expanse of shifting sands, scorching heat, and scarce water, did not deter the persistence of these trade networks. Caravans of camels, known as the ships of the desert, traversed these formidable landscapes, connecting distant communities in a rhythm of exchange that underpinned the wealth and power of medieval African kingdoms. These journeys were perilous and demanding, requiring intricate knowledge of routes, oases, and climatic conditions, testifying to the ingenuity and resilience of African traders and guides. Beyond the economic and political dimensions, the medieval kingdoms fostered vibrant artistic traditions. Architecture flourished, with monumental mosques and palaces constructed in distinctive styles utilizing local materials such as mud bricks. The Great Mosque of Jen, rebuilt in the 13th century and later renovated, stands as a testament to the ingenuity of Sudano-Sahelian architecture and the centrality of religious life. Sculpture, weaving, metalworking, and music also thrived, reflecting both local creativity and external influences brought through trade and cultural exchange. The social fabric of these empires was characterized by complex hierarchies and diverse populations. Nobility and royal families maintained authority through elaborate ceremonies and patronage, while merchants and artisans occupied crucial roles within urban centers. Peasant farmers and pastoralists formed the backbone of the economy, sustaining agricultural productivity and supplying food to growing populations. Slavery existed within these societies, often in different forms than those later imposed by transatlantic forces, integrated into social and economic systems in ways that varied widely across the region. The echoes of these medieval kingdoms continue to resonate in contemporary Africa, their legacies embedded in languages, cultural practices, and collective memory. The wealth generated by the trans-Saharan trade laid the groundwork for later interactions with external powers, while the intellectual and artistic achievements of cities like Timbuktu challenge reductive notions of Africa's past as static or undeveloped. As this period draws to a close, it becomes clear that the medieval African empires were dynamic, interconnected forces that shaped not only the continent's internal development but also its relations with the wider world. Their histories illuminate the continent's capacity for statecraft, cultural synthesis, and economic innovation, setting the stage for the complex interactions that would follow with European explorers and traders. The trans-Saharan trade routes, once lifelines of African prosperity and exchange, would soon face profound challenges and transformations in the centuries ahead, heralding new chapters in the continent's enduring story. The arrival of European explorers along Africa's coast in the 15th century marked a momentous turning point in the continent's history, initiating a complex and often tragic new chapter. Initially drawn by the promise of wealth, new trade routes, and territorial expansion, these early encounters set in motion profound transformations that would reverberate through African societies for centuries to come. The Portuguese, under the leadership of figures such as Prince Henry the Navigator, spearheaded the exploration of the West African coastline, establishing trading posts and forging maritime routes that connected Europe and Africa in unprecedented ways. European navigation and maritime technology advanced rapidly during this period, enabling longer voyages and the mapping of coastlines previously unknown to Europeans. The establishment of forts and trading enclaves along strategic points, such as Elmina Castle on the Gold Coast, facilitated the exchange of goods, including gold, ivory, and spices. However, these initial commercial interactions soon expanded into far more devastating enterprises as the demand for enslaved labor grew in the Americas, fueling the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade emerged as one of the most catastrophic and defining features of this era, uprooting millions of Africans from their homelands and dispersing them across plantations and colonies in the New World. This forced migration was marked by unimaginable suffering, with individuals torn from their communities, subjected to brutal conditions during the Middle Passage, and stripped of their identities and rights. The demographic, social, and economic impacts on African societies were profound and long-lasting. Entire regions experienced depopulation, while traditional social structures were disrupted as warfare and raiding intensified to capture slaves for European traders. The trade itself was facilitated through complex networks involving African intermediaries, kingdoms, coastal chiefs, and merchant classes, who engaged with European powers for profit and political advantage. This dynamic created new power relations and altered existing ones, as some African polities gained wealth and arms through participation in the slave trade, while others were weakened or destroyed. The consequences extended beyond economics, undermining cultural cohesion and fostering cycles of violence and instability. Alongside the slave trade, European contact introduced new goods, technologies, and religious influences into African societies. Firearms, metal tools, textiles, and alcohol became integrated into local economies and social practices, sometimes exacerbating conflicts and altering traditional ways of life. Christian missionary activity accompanied colonial ambitions, seeking to convert African populations and reshape spiritual landscapes. While some communities embraced or adapted these new elements, others resisted or blended them with indigenous beliefs, reflecting the continent's enduring cultural resilience. The coastal enclaves established by Europeans initially functioned as trading posts rather than territories of direct control. However, these footholds laid the groundwork for expanding imperial ambitions that would culminate in the colonization of vast African territories in subsequent centuries. The scramble for resources and strategic dominance drove European powers to deepen their involvement inland, often disregarding African sovereignty and customary governance. The transatlantic slave trade also had profound implications for the Americas and Europe, shaping demographic patterns, economies, and social hierarchies. The labor of enslaved Africans underpinned the growth of plantation economies producing sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other commodities critical to European markets. This intercontinental exchange created a triangular trade system linking Africa, Europe, and the Americas, embedding Africa within a global capitalist economy marked by exploitation and inequality. Despite the horrors of slavery and the economic extraction it entailed, African societies demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resistance. Some communities reorganized politically and militarily to defend against slave raids, while others forged alliances or migrated to safer regions. The preservation of cultural traditions, languages, and spiritual practices among enslaved Africans and their descendants in the diaspora testifies to the indomitable spirit that withstood attempts at erasure and dehumanization. The arrival of European explorers and the ensuing transatlantic slave trade irrevocably altered the trajectory of African history. It introduced new dynamics of power, economy, and culture that reshaped the continent's social fabric and international relations. The legacy of this period is complex, marked by immense suffering but also by resilience, adaptation, and enduring cultural vitality. As African societies navigated these profound changes, they laid the groundwork for the challenges and transformations that would define the continent's encounter with colonialism and the modern world. The late 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed a dramatic and often violent reshaping of the African continent through the process known as the scramble for Africa. Driven by industrialization, nationalism, and strategic rivalries among European powers, this period saw the rapid partition and colonization of nearly the entire continent. What had begun as coastal trading ports transformed into vast territories under foreign control, as colonial powers imposed new political boundaries and systems that disregarded existing ethnic, cultural, and political realities. The consequences of this epoch would resonate deeply within African societies, shaping their social, economic, and political trajectories for generations. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 epitomized the formalization of European claims to African lands, where imperial powers convened to negotiate and delineate spheres of influence without the presence or consent of African representatives. This diplomatic gathering accelerated the division of Africa into colonial possessions, rationalized under the guise of a civilizing mission and economic exploitation. France, Britain, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and Italy emerged as dominant colonial powers, each carving out territories that reflected their strategic interests and imperial ambitions. The imposition of colonial rule brought profound economic transformations. European powers sought to extract Africa's abundant natural resources, minerals, agricultural products, and labor to fuel their burgeoning industries. Infrastructure such as railways, ports, and telegraph lines was developed primarily to facilitate the export of raw materials rather than to promote local development. Cash crop economies were established, often at the expense of subsistence farming, altering traditional livelihoods and social structures. The introduction of new land tenure systems and taxation policies disrupted communal landholding and compelled many Africans into wage labor under exploitative conditions. Social and cultural upheavals accompanied these economic changes. Colonial administrations implemented policies that sought to control and reshape African societies, often through indirect rule, which co-opted traditional leaders into colonial governance structures, or direct rule, which sought to supplant indigenous authority altogether. Missionary activity intensified, spreading Christianity and Western education, which simultaneously created new opportunities and avenues for social mobility while undermining indigenous beliefs and institutions. The colonial states' legal systems enforced racial segregation and discriminatory practices that entrenched social hierarchies privileging Europeans and marginalizing Africans. Resistance to colonial conquest and domination was widespread and multifaceted, manifesting in armed uprisings, diplomatic negotiations, and cultural persistence. From the Zulu Wars in southern Africa to the Ashanti resistance in West Africa, indigenous peoples confronted the encroachment of colonial powers with valor and determination. Leaders such as Samori Touré, the Herero chief Samoa Moharero, and the Modi in Sudan galvanized opposition, employing military tactics and forging alliances to defend their territories and peoples. Though many uprisings were eventually suppressed by superior European firepower and resources, these acts of resistance underscored the refusal of African societies to acquiesce passively to foreign rule. The impact of the two world wars further shaped the colonial experience in Africa. African soldiers were conscripted and fought in European theaters, their contributions often overlooked in post-war narratives. The wars exposed contradictions in colonial governance and weakened European powers economically and politically, sowing seeds for future challenges to imperialism. Returning veterans brought new perspectives and demands for rights and recognition, fueling early nationalist sentiments and organized movements advocating for self-determination. Throughout this era, treaties were frequently imposed on African rulers under duress or through deception, formalizing European claims while eroding sovereignty. These accords often disregarded local governance structures and customary laws, sowing divisions and tensions that colonial administrations exploited through divide-and-rule strategies. The arbitrary borders drawn during this period grouped diverse ethnic groups within single colonies or split cohesive communities across multiple territories, creating enduring challenges for post-colonial nation-building. The colonial conquest and partition of Africa thus represent a complex and transformative epoch characterized by exploitation, violence, but also resilience and adaptation. The economic reorientation toward global markets, the restructuring of political authority, and the cultural incursions by missionary and colonial agents all contributed to a profound remaking of African societies. Yet, even amid oppression, African peoples preserved traditions, adapted to new realities, and laid the groundwork for future struggles. This period set the stage for the emergence of resistance movements and early nationalism, as Africans across the continent began to articulate visions of freedom and self-governance. The legacy of colonialism, its imposed borders, economic dependencies, and social hierarchies, would continue to shape Africa's political landscape well into the 20th century, influencing the trajectories of independence movements and post-colonial states. Understanding this era is thus essential to grasping the complexities and challenges that define modern African history. The dawn of the 20th century illuminated a new chapter in Africa's long and tumultuous history, the rise of resistance movements and the early stirrings of nationalism that challenged colonial domination. Across the continent, diverse peoples and leaders mobilized to contest foreign rule, asserting their rights, identities, and visions for self-determination. These struggles were complex, reflecting the myriad social, political, and cultural realities of African societies under colonial rule, and they paved the way for the sweeping independence movements that would emerge mid-century. Resistance to colonial conquest had never ceased since the imposition of European authority, but the early 20th century witnessed a shift in strategies and aspirations. While armed uprisings and rebellions continued, there was also a growing tendency toward organized political activism, intellectual engagement, and appeals to international audiences. African elites, often educated in mission schools or abroad, began to articulate critiques of colonialism rooted in ideas of equality, human rights, and national sovereignty. These early nationalists forged political parties, labor unions, and cultural associations that sought to unify disparate groups around common goals. In West Africa, leaders such as Blaise Diagne of Senegal and Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya emerged as prominent voices advocating for African political participation and reform. Diagne's election to the French National Assembly in 1914 marked a significant milestone, giving African concerns a platform within metropolitan institutions. Meanwhile, Kenyatta's involvement with the Kikuyu Central Association and later the Kenya African National Union exemplified the intersection of cultural revival and political mobilization. Such figures bridged traditional leadership and modern political activism, embodying the complexities of nationalist movements that were both rooted in indigenous identities and influenced by global currents. The impact of World War I and World War II on African colonial societies was profound in accelerating nationalist sentiments. African soldiers who served in European armies returned home with heightened political awareness and expectations for rights and recognition. The contradictions of fighting for freedom abroad while enduring oppression at home were not lost on these veterans and their communities. Additionally, the economic hardships and social dislocations caused by the wars destabilized colonial administrations, creating openings for anti-colonial agitation. In many regions, resistance took on forms that intertwined cultural assertion with political demands. The promotion and preservation of indigenous languages, customs, and histories became acts of defiance against colonial attempts to erase or marginalize African identities. Movements such as the Negritude literary and intellectual movement celebrated African heritage and challenged Eurocentric narratives. This cultural renaissance fostered pride and solidarity that undergirded political activism. Labor movements also played a crucial role in early nationalism. As colonial economies expanded, African workers increasingly organized strikes and protests to demand better wages, working conditions, and political rights. These labor struggles often crossed ethnic and regional lines, contributing to the formation of broader coalitions against colonial authority. The intersections of economic exploitation and political disenfranchisement galvanized many Africans to envision alternative futures beyond colonial subjugation. Religious movements sometimes intersected with nationalist aspirations, providing organizational structures and moral frameworks for resistance. Figures like Simon Kimbangu in the Congo and Elijah Muhammad in the United States inspired followers with messages of liberation and self-empowerment. In South Africa, the African National Congress, founded in 1912, emerged as a central platform for political opposition, advocating for the rights of black South Africans within the oppressive system of racial segregation that would later harden into apartheid. Despite the diversity of approaches and context, early nationalist movements shared a common desire to reclaim sovereignty and dignity for African peoples. They confronted formidable challenges, including repression by colonial authorities, internal divisions, and the complexities of uniting vast and varied populations under single political banners. Nevertheless, these movements laid essential groundwork for the mass mobilizations and political negotiations that would characterize the struggle for independence in the decades to follow. The legacy of these early resistance and nationalist movements endures as a testament to African agency and resilience in the face of colonial domination. They illuminate the continent's capacity for political innovation, cultural affirmation, and collective action, often in the most adverse conditions. As these movements gained momentum, they not only challenged the legitimacy of colonial rule but also began to envision new political orders rooted in African aspirations and values. Thus, the period of resistance and early nationalism represents a critical bridge between the era of colonial conquest and the impending wave of decolonization. It is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of armed struggle, political advocacy, cultural revival, and social protest. These multifaceted efforts would soon coalesce into powerful independence movements that reshaped the map of Africa and heralded a new era of self-determination and nation-building. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.